9:03 and it's 9:03 and let's get our budget meeting started on June 1st, 9:03. And with that, I call this meeting to order.
Great. So the big part of today's meeting will certainly be walking you through the 23-24 proposed budget. Just as a reminder on the timeline, today is a learning opportunity, ask lots of questions. Kay and Matt will walk us through the budget book essentially. And then after today's meeting, we will reconvene on June 8th, so a week from today. And that's when, for the first time in public, we'll bring it back out. You'll have a chance to ask more questions that you might have thought about since then. And then for us to make it also formally public in an open meeting. And then that will provide 2 more weeks for the community to provide any feedback to you. And we'll have also the community hearing, the budget hearing at your June 22nd board meeting, at which point the public will have a chance to formally speak to you and talk about the budget. We'll close that hearing, and then at that meeting, if you're ready to do so as a board, you can vote to enact that budget for the 23-24 year. This is a couple months earlier, as we've been forecasting since around October or November, when Matt first presented to you all and said that he prefers a timeline that gets the budget ready by the end of June, rather than waiting till July. And then that allows for better preparation, better implementation of the budget for all the schools and the departments and the district as a whole. So it'll just help us to better forecast for the coming year. So please ask lots of questions as we go along. Time permitting, I'd love to entertain a short discussion about the June 22nd study session as well. I was talking to President D'Souza ahead of this meeting and just sharing that I've been taking a few notes along the way about topics you may want to dive into, mainly around the fundamentals and possibly reviewing those. So time permitting, we can brainstorm a few topics for that to give us some time to prepare, and we'll go from there. And before we launch into it, we had a great night last night. Director Luria and D'Souza were able to attend the retirement / staff members of the year / service award winners evening, and had a great night. It's fun to stroll down memory lane as we got to do with a lot of our really terrific employees and remember about the great people in the district who are making it all happen. And then today is the start of June, which is Pride Month. And so we have flags that we've given out to all of the schools for the Pride Month. We have one here at the district office. We also have Juneteenth coming up this month. So we will actually, last year, the 19th fell after the last day of school. So this year it's actually during the school year. So we'll be observing that on the 19th. And then we also have graduation coming up. So just such a wonderful month ahead. So with that, it's so wonderful that we're going to talk budget. So Matt and Kay, we'll turn it over to you.
All right. First off, I thank you to the board for your patience over this past year with our financial ups and downs, and hopefully myself, Director Adams, Assistant Director Garcia Father have been writing that ship appropriately throughout the last about 10 months or so. Provided to you, we're pleased to present the 2023 and 2024 budget booklet, or budget summary, if you will. We will walk page by page with you as we scroll through on the big screens, but also on your computers, and I have hard copy in front of me. As Superintendent Rundle had mentioned, if you have questions, you most likely will, please feel free to interrupt, stop us midstream, and we will do our best to answer those questions. As noted, we still have about a month before adoption. This document in itself is a draft of the budget. We just received about a week ago the F-203 from OSPI. It's quite late coming out of Olympia, but nothing unusual or nothing we haven't tackled before over the last decade in the school districts. So that F-203, of course, is the online tool that produces as accurately as we can the revenues for our district. With that, then we take that information and place them in, put them in the different charts and tables that you'll see as we move forward here into this budget document. Hopefully this document is easily understandable, digestible, and we take a look at it from those that don't understand school budgets, that they could pick this 34-page document up and go, oh, I have a pretty good idea of how the finances in a school district work. Some of the stuff here might be quite rudimentary to all of us, but we have to take a look at the eyes of those that don't know school district financing. With that said, any questions before we start? And otherwise, we'll start turning pages. All right.
Excited to begin.
We have the table of contents on page 1, 2, and then we go into the introduction, the executive summary. There's a nice little letter here from myself and Superintendent Rundle that helps to lay out where we're going to go in this document. On to page 5 is where the meat of the budget starts to take place. And we look at the first table, budget processes and changes. Specifically, we look at expenditure comparison for all funds. As noted early in the fall, at the year end, the F196 budget summary document. Of course, this is our F195 budget document for 23-24. Anytime you see one of these tables or charts, below there'll be an explanation of kind of why the changes. And we always compare year to year. It's a little apples and oranges, as we know how the legislature works with funding of school districts, but it's our kind of our best kind of marker from year to year. With that, we look at the change, kind of dollar figure up or down, and then I give you a percent change on the right-hand side. This one looks at our 5 funds: general, capital, debt service, ASB, and transportation. We will do a deeper dive, obviously, into the general fund. That is what is the fuel to our engine in our school district. But we do give some brief examples of the changes in regard to capital, debt service, ASB, and transportation. Right off the bat, you notice in the general fund, we go from 71.6 to $75.5 million. It looks like, wow, we might be receiving a ton of revenue from the state. Well, that's not the case. We are changing how we do our accounting practices in regard to our CapTech levy to our general fund. I'll turn over to Director Adams to be more specific and more granular with you.
The way we currently do our CapTech levy is to spend the money out of general and then credit back all those expenditures and move them into capital. It is very time consuming, more chance for error. And it's the old way of doing it. Many, many years ago, this is how we did it. The new way is to leave those expenditures in general, and then you just do one transfer from capital into general. So those expenditures stay intact. And they look, to me, they're more auditable for the auditors to look at. So we're starting with the salaries next year. We're not going to move the salaries out of general. We're going to keep them there, but we're going to transfer the money from capital to cover them. So that's why you see the big jump of $3 million.
Basically, look at it as a reimbursement from the CapTech fund, from the capital levy, CapTech levy from the capital fund into the general fund. Hence, you see this increase of about $3.9 million more in general. Obviously, a part of that increase also is due to the BEA, or the allocation from the state. So there is about a little over $1 million in there also that does increase that. Plus, we've added a little bit more to capacity.
Yeah.
And just interrupt me if I'm over speaking or explaining or over explaining. Capacity, of course, in the school district is the ability for a district such as ourselves, well, every district in the state, if they receive new revenue from, let's say, federal grants, local funding, etc., then we have the ability, instead of doing a budget revision, which has to go to the ESD for approval, which has to go to you approval, which has to go to the state for approval and come back, which usually takes 2 or 3 months, which sadly we've had to do one time. Capacity gives us the ability, to be agile with our finances. On the capital side, we see an increase, as Director Adams explained, due to the transfer of the general fund for CapTech levy salaries. Debt service, that is basically the amortization schedule of payments that's established via that resolution and approval prior to the vote in 2014, where those 2 parts of our bond that'll be cured in 2028 and 2029. ASB, there's de minimis change. I had to throw that in there, Director Susan. And then transportation, we have a decrease due to the number of buses purchased. This year, we purchased 2 electric and 2 diesel. Next year, we're only looking to purchase 2 electric. So hence there is a less if you will, budget allocated for the transportation fund.
And Director Sullivan, can you just walk us through, because I know for me, I knew we had spent down our transportation levy, which is how we typically buy buses. We didn't go out for a new levy. And so this is money based on our the depreciation schedule and being able to keep buses. We followed all the schedules or whatnot, so the state gave us money to do this, is that?
Correct. So we have about 39 buses in our fleet. If I recall, we have 22 large, 84 passenger, 83 passenger buses. We purchased a bus, it's on a depreciation schedule from the state for about a 13-year period. Over those 13 years, in August every month, we receive a portion of the revenue from the state for the cost amortized out 13 years of said bus. Hence, this year we'll be getting about a little over $500,000 for those buses. We put that in that transportation fund, and we can then in turn buy new buses. The depreciation schedule really doesn't equate to new buses per se. It equates to a percentage of new buses, but it's a way that we can afford our electric buses without having to do a levy.
So, some questions. We reduce the capital budget to move it to general fund. How did that happen? Does it reflect as a reduction?
Well, what it is when I have to do the transfer, I have to show as an expenditure in the capital fund. It goes under a special general ledger code.
That's why the budget is the same in
Yeah,
both sides,
yeah.
because that transfer isn't there.
Yeah.
And then, inflation has been a big deal as well.
Mhm.
How did, our budgets have stayed the same in 22 and 23, but inflation was about 6%. And that should be reflected here. So we really didn't get a much bigger budget once you adjust for inflation.
Correct.
I think this isn't really a question, this is just, I think the work with our transportation department and you guys is tremendous to be able to afford new buses without going out for a levy. And, I think that's a source of being able to communicate as we talk about future spending. Am I making any sense yet? I think that's a great play.
Yeah. And then also, on the side note, Saturday, we'll have the electric bus out on routes and runs, and we have some decals we're sticking on the sides of those buses that say 100% electric. Good PR, if you will.
Yeah, agree, Deborah. That's great. I think it's fantastic that we originally thought 2 buses will be had, we're now getting 3. It's a great way to experiment and understand what it costs for infrastructure, the reliability of the buses, and will make us much more confident when we go out for a larger transportation levy to electrify our fleet.
I agree fully.
And that message to the community went out, that, people will be able to ride from the middle school to downtown shopping area, to Vivian's Bistro, to the middle school, to Island Park. So they're gonna run it all around, and people are gonna be able to, like a trolley, jump on it.
Can I just ask a related question about the buses? And I don't need an answer today, but I think the community would probably love an update now that we have the reality of these buses, here and on their way. Like it would be great to kind of just have a little reminder for the community of like, how are we paying for these buses, and what's the what's the cost, like what's the cost savings of an electric bus versus a diesel bus. And I know that when we originally talked about, or the last time we talked about it, there was a real shortage of mechanics who were qualified to work on these buses. Is it still true that there's only 2 mechanics for all of Washington State? Are we kind of going to get in a situation where maybe like one of our buses breaks down and we have to like borrow a bus from some other district or something like that? So just at some point before, like at some point by this fall, like, could we just get a little update on that? Wait, sorry, hang on, my kid is talking. Yeah.
We certainly can. We'll certainly have that. We have a number of updates that we'll need to do, and that's a great addition to that. So perfect.
Great, thanks.
And on to page 6, there is analysis of proposed general fund budgeted expenditures as mentioned. Of course, I get a little wordy in the top part of that page. But it was comparisons in regard to MSOC versus personnel, but there's also a chart a few pages later that discusses that, or at least a visual of those differences. At the bottom of the page, of course, is another table. It's the 4-year budget plan summary with estimated ending fund balance. We look at general capital, debt service, once again, ASB and transportation. And I added in here our estimated ending fund balance right under the general fund. This is the 4-year budget plan summary, which I'm gonna say 3 or 4 years ago, the state passed a law that we have 4 years ago.
4 years.
4 years ago, that we were required to have a 4-year budget plan summary within our budget, approved via resolution, you all, the board. We can take a look at this and discuss it. I'll be blunt, I don't put too much emphasis on this, as we all know how the legislature acts year to year to year, and things can change quite drastically. But we did take a look at this, put the numbers in as we're required to, and then obviously the estimated ending fund balance is in there as we move forward.
Sorry, why is it NA for 26, 27?
Because myself, Director Adams are fearful of putting a number in there that far out. Any good finance person probably wouldn't. I'm not comfortable. We're looking at probably 8 or 10% in 26, 27, but it's so far out and so many things could change. We're not comfortable.
Fair enough. Thank you.
I pushed them hard. To get to that, the main thing I wanted to show, and I think it's important for us to keep reiterating to our community, and it's important to us as administrators who are accountable to you as a board. There are 2 key percentages that I think we have to keep our eye on. The first one is the 5%, because that's in OE7, and that is kind of the new floor that you set. And so we want to get above that. And then the next one is the 8 to 10%. And so I wanted to make sure there was at least a 5 on here and that there was an 8 on here. That was important. I couldn't get them to get to 10. If you want to, you can direct me and then but that 5 and 8, we definitely wanted to get to.
As I mentioned last week, believe me, we want to get there as soon as humanly possible, but we have to be cognizant of other programs, operations throughout the district, and CBAs, etc.
I'm sure NA is the right term.
You could put a question
I
mark.
could put a dash there.
That's not what I did, but yeah.
But if you all don't want anything, we can easily put some.
No,
Maybe TBD might be a little better.
TBD, I can do that.
Or an arrow up.
Yeah.
I mean,
Or just a picture of little bags of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is great. It does reflect how far we have come. I think we started out before COVID with about 10%
Yes.
fund balance.
Right.
Through COVID, we got down to 2%, maybe below that at some point.
Yes.
Even with that 2% fund balance, we had ESSER dollars and a lot of other federal stimulus
Yeah.
funding that helped keep us solvent. So I think 2 highlights for me really are how important fund balance was towards getting us through a 50-year storm like COVID. It also highlighted the importance of the 8 to 10% number in many ways. I mean, we really went below 8 to 10% of our fund balance, thanks to ESSER dollars, we were able to do that. But it really does codify and strengthen the value of the 8 to 10% fund balance number. It'll take us through 2 months of no revenue from the state. It can also take us through a 50-year storm. So it's really shown itself to be valuable and not just a number pulled out of air.
Yeah, I agree. And we've seen where the state has not provided for transportation funding for 1 month because they've run into problems. And so that is a savings account for us for those months, those years, those 50-year storm, as you mentioned. It's just vital, it's critical.
I also see what on here that, and when we went below that, it shows our value for the community, for our people, the staff, so I think as we used it in really necessary ways, right? To keep our district afloat and stable and consistent. So there's not as much of a ripple. And then I appreciate this really balanced approach of slowly increasing, because it is a balance of regaining back the fund balance and also doing the best we can to meet the needs of those in our district. So I hope people also see that strategy. And that even though there are things like this, like the pandemic that we couldn't control, we really did the best we could. And I think with the leadership at different levels, that I think we weathered it pretty well.
And it was a lengthy response, so if you haven't gotten to it, no worries, but I did share with you earlier this week a response to a parent who kind of had some questions about, you know, I think ultimately how stable are we? And I think this conversation right here really demonstrates how far we've come and the things that we've been able to accomplish in just the last 12 months with respect to repayments and really, you know, thinking about, you know, we have fewer students too. So there's another aspect of decreased revenue and adjustments. And so not only the ESSER funds, it's decreased revenue from our students, but then being able to repay ourselves as quickly as we did, moving on to bigger and brighter things. So.
On to page 7, as mentioned previously, here is a really a deep dive, a granular look into our general fund. If you know that the accounting codes of the state that are provided to us for school districts, there's many different ways to look at how we spend money, if you will. One of the easiest ways and most topical is by object. We could look at program, we could look at activity, we could look at location, but object seems to be the most prevalent. In this case, we look at, it provides salaries certified, salaries classified, and benefits. And then below we see the MSOC, which is of course an acronym for materials, supplies, and operating costs, hence supplies, materials, purchase services, travel, and then capital. And we obviously have the 22 to 23, the 23 to 24, that plus minus change in dollar amounts, but also percent change year to year.
Any questions on this one?
So every time you see one of those, the next page that's so large, we do such a deep dive. On page 8, we have explanations for those changes, at least at a general level. So if you look at our salary certified, there's a plus 4%-ish, a little over 4%. The increase is due to bargaining salaries for certified staff and non-represented certified staff. And once again, a change in the practice for the CapTech levy salaries. We have salaries classified, once again, increase due to bargaining salaries for classified staff and non-represented classified staff. And again, the change in practice for CapTech levy salaries. So similar on both fronts. The benefits, I'll let you jump into the benefits there. So
The same reason, the
Right.
benefits, because of the CapTech levy and because SEB is increasing slightly.
So SEB is
The
obviously a benefit,
insurance,
yeah.
it's gonna be $74 more a month per person. So,
And
supplies went up slightly because, of course, inflation, cost of things cost a lot more. Contract services have went up because of special ed and out of state placements.
purchase services. not
Yeah,
just-
purchase services. Some of it wasn't budgeted last year, so this year we're making sure that we have the budget in there for those out-of-state placements. Travel,
Oh, well, sorry, I didn't touch on the risk pool
oh yeah, risk pool is going up by 14%.
or
So
insurance.
it's going from about 783 up to almost 900,000.
And sorry, that's part of purchase services, the risk pool?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
it's our insurance.
Can I just say, I've not seen it broken out like this before, and this is such a helpful, like intuitive way of explaining this. This makes it very much more understandable for like us and for the community. Really, really helpful. Thanks for doing this.
That's what we try to do. Travel, will there be a slight increase in travel? Pandemic is over. We're going to be able to do professional development again. So, and then capital purchases is down because I found that we weren't using the account code correct. It is capital outlay has to be a purchase over $5,000 or a component that's over 5,000. We had miscellaneous budget throughout for $1,000 here, 1,000. So I made adjustments to put them in the right account codes. So that's why that one changed.
So they appear in different components all the way up north of,
Yeah,
Not
5,000 and above,
Okay.
not just 2,000 here, 1,000 there. It doesn't work that way for capital. That's why supply went up a little too, because I've got it coded correctly now.
You can see the cleanup as we go along.
I'm trying.
On to page 9, as I mentioned previously, here is a visual of personnel versus MSOC year to year, 2022, 2023 to 23, 24. Within between the two pie charts is a breakdown of what exactly is contained in personnel versus MSOC. So you can see the differences there and the percentage differences. Where in 22, 23, MSOC was about 16.4% and personnel was about 83.6%. And then we estimate next year around 17% for MSOC and then personnel at 83%. And then on to page 10, another little chart, which I do like, is 22, 23 budgeted sources of our revenue and versus 23, 24. As we all know, we really have 3 major sources of revenue. It comes from local, those are our levies. It comes from state, which is apportionment. And then we have federal, which are grants that come through the state. And then other things such as the Mercer Island Schools Foundation, and then a breakdown of exactly what the dollar is to the percentage and then total. And then myself and Fred's signature. And then we get into several pages of, if you don't know how a school district operates and you're reading this document, who's the who and what's the what, if you will. On page 12, we have board of directors, the school board, and kind of what you all do in your roles, position, term, names, etc. On page 13, we have district administration with our titles, names, and also our phone numbers, so people can contact us. And then similar on page 14, we have our district administration, our schools, and our principals. I haven't put their mascots in there because school spirit counts. And then on page 15, we get into things that you have seen and been presented to you. Specifically on April 20th meeting, we walked through the org chart. And then on the April 20th meeting, also on page 16, we had the student fee presentation and discussion. And on page 17 is.
and just on that one, just a reminder, we had talked to you about a couple things that we were still working out. So you can see a couple things, I believe, in red there, that they are where we,
ranges.
yeah, we put in the ranges, and we've got the correct ranges in there now.
And then page 17 is the 23-24 school calendar. One of my favorite pages on page 18. And what was discussed at the March 23rd meeting and presented was Mercer Island property tax rates for 2023. Obviously the pie chart, the total rate, where your taxes going to, and then the historical and current levy rates broken down by bond, cap tech, EP&O, and transportation. The little transportation wing is back there in 2017. And we go into our budget development.
Can I ask a
costs. Oh,
question?
sorry.
I know, I get this question a lot, and I just want to make sure I'm explaining it right, and I appreciate these numbers because it helps, but with regards to our taxes and going towards with McCleary and paying more out of city, out of district than within, so it's basically double what we're sending out versus what we're paying taxes for our school.
That's a rough, yes,
Okay.
exactly. And what you see in there in that yellow part of the pie and the light blue was basically a flip flop is what happened after 2018, where the state then enacted the state schools tax and we got the levy cap, and to many degrees, it did not help us.
And Andrews, would you go back to the pie chart as well? So this is, I think, where you're getting that, the $2.31 versus the $1.29
Yeah.
there. We get some of that yellow back, but it's more goes out than comes
Yes.
back. I don't know the exact percentage on that. I don't know if there's a way to calculate that, but we certainly are paying out more than we're receiving back on the yellow.
And then 19, we start the budget development process. This, of course, is for those that are kind of learning school district finances. I'm citing our different funds to it must be balanced, to citing our CW throughout the process, our accounting system, and our 5 major funds and what they do from general to transportation. And then on page 21, we walked through the March 23rd meeting with you, budget assumptions and priorities, how the OEs relate to our budget process. And then what was added is the bottom of the page, and I thought it was important to note in regard to our downgrading of our credit rating back in November of 2022, the factors associated with that. We went from AAA to AA1 and why. And then also a note per OE7 kind of that's kind of baked into this budget is building in a healthy fund balance and why we do that, and critical to maintain and to raise our credit rating, but also to prepare for future emergencies and to be able to pay staff and monthly operating costs during a fiscal crisis. So that's in there also. All right, on to page 23. We touched on part of this at the March 23rd meeting, summary of the 23-24 budgets, but I will turn it over to Director Adams because now we fully, it's almost gonna be a horrible sentence, fully filled in this chart. We've completed this chart, this table for you, Director Adams.
Remember, these are estimates, okay? So you look and we do a comparison between, we show you 22, 23. And if it is bold, it is an actual number. It is what we began the year with, 1,759,100, what we began the year with in general. And then we have our budgeted revenue and our budgeted expenditures. These are calculations right now of what I think we're going to end the year with by looking at reports. And hopefully we're going to end the year at 2.5, which would be wonderful. And then next year, we always show a balanced budget in our reports, mostly just for general. General, we like to have a balanced budget, and you'll see the transfer in there this year on how we are changing the cap tech levy
Next year.
for next year. So yeah, next year. So you'll see a positive transfer into general and a negative transfer out of capital. Our goal next year is to hit 3.4 if we can. That is our goal. That's going to be 4%. I believe that's what it was, right? 4%. So we're going to do everything we can, but not damage the schools to hit that. That's our main goal, is to keep the education where it's at, but to build our fund balance. Capital is pretty simple. We're using some of that additional money we had in capital from past years and still using it to help with the general fund. This might be the last year we'll be able to do that. It depends on the interest in what we do in capital for next year, and all the projects that we have laid out. Debt service is set, it's a schedule. So this is all based on the schedule that we receive.
And something we do is each year we bounce our debt service amounts and estimates off our friends at Piper Sandler's. They are the bond experts.
Yeah.
And we just want to make sure we're matching, aligning, if you will, with our amortization schedule that was approved back in 2014 by the previous iteration of the school board. And they do a checks and balance. We just make sure we get as accurate as possible.
With ASB, I get the input from all the schools. They send me their budget, and then we put a little bit of capacity just in case a trip comes up or something they didn't plan on. So we always can make sure that the students can fundraise and do what they want that next year. And then the last one, transportation, that is all based on the depreciation schedule. That's where our revenue comes from for transportation. And this is showing that hopefully we have some money for some additional buses next year.
3.75 in parentheses in capital to show it the negative.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't put a negative in there?
There's no negative.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, put the negative there. I thought I had it, but I got
It's probably my fault.
it. This takes a long time.
Very, very smart guy.
I'll make that change right now.
Yeah.
At the bottom of that table, once again, it goes a little bit deeper dive into the accounting system of schools, but what's considered restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned in regard to our GLs, our accounts, if you will, for our fund balance. But it helps kind of lay out where things are kept, if you will, in the accounting world of school districts.
And how should people think about the school's foundation donations? Is that reflected in revenues anywhere on this graph?
Yeah, it's, the expenditures are in the charts and the offsetting revenue are in there too. They're the exact same amount. So whatever we spend, we'll receive from the foundation. And we carried over in a restricted GL at the end of the year. We calculate exactly how much is left on that money we have received and put it in a restricted GL.
If you see number 1 at the bottom there, that's where it lives.
You'll see it on the budget text at the end.
And then on page 24, this is what the auditors look for, is that resolution, which will be number 724. Thank you, Michelle. And it allocates appropriation levels for the 5 funds. And that will be in front of you at the June 22nd meeting. And then on to page, a little bit, a different way of looking at our revenues and expenditures actually are summaries by program, another accounting code system as opposed to object. On page 27, we look at general fund summary by program. Turn it over to Director Adams.
So as you can see on this, this is where the restricted funds come in, like you were asking about. You see restricted for carryover and donations at the very top. That's where we will move the money that's left over from donations and put it in a special GL so it can't be spent on anything else but that. Then the next one is your minimum fund balance. That is our reserves. You have your inventory prepaid items we do that, you know, you have to start a year. Sometimes you have to get the stuff in August so you can start in September, but we pay it out of next year.
This is what we call friendly or due to, due from.
Yes. And then the committed, there's a reason we have the committed for other purpose starting next year. Special ed is getting additional funds this year to help with the student next year. So I want to make sure that is in a reserved account that can't be spent anywhere else. It's for an out-of-state placement that we have to have. So I wanted to make sure we have that. Then you go down and we break up our revenue by the funding source, your local taxes, local revenue, what the state's going to provide us, state special ed. Federal is where some of the capacity lives that we have built into the schedule, expenditure schedule. So if we do get additional grants, we do have the room to accept them. The other one is other revenues are like from the city pool, a special grant SBIRT, which comes from the county. And the last one is the other financing sources. You'll see that's where we're adjusting the cap tech levy and leaving the expenditures in the general and moving. Then you go down and here is our expenditures broken down by programs.
And once again, this is just a very different way, well, not a very different way, but a different way in our accounting system to look at our expenditures and revenue. We're looking at object before, now we're looking at program. It's just 6 different sides of a coin to take a different aspect, if you will.
00 is your basic education. And then if you go down, you'll see 20 is special education. You'll notice that the ESSER funds are gone. So we're not receiving any more there. And then the other one is grants titles, title, lab, bilingual. And then 7 is for instructional programs, summer school, highly capable. And the last one, community service, is really the pool and other areas, community-based expenditures. And the last is the 90, which is district support, which is everything at the district office, the district cost.
Utilities, insurance, we mentioned the risk pool, facilities, food service.
I am so sorry, I got lost.
They're coming there next.
Am I missing something?
And then, and this is just an estimate at the ending year balance next year. And for this year too. We're trying.
Yeah, this is a great chart, actually. It helps showcase how we don't get reimbursed for special ed at the level that we need to. And also showcases, that we do spend a significant amount on our special ed students
Yes.
relative to our overall budget, to make sure that our most, the most needy get the services they need. Yeah.
And on to page 28 and 29, we also did a 5-6-year look at our classified FTE and also our certified FTE and the ups and downs, if you will, of those positions, broken down by object, because it's an easy way to look at it and one that people can easily understand. But it goes everything from, the classified side of teaching, which are parent educators, to teaching support, aides, guidance and counseling, people management and safety, our monitors, to our other support, health, ASB, food service, grounds, custodial, maintenance, tech, transportation, maintenance transportation, tech theater specialist, network, to building administration, office manager and aides, to our central administration here. And obviously the board is also in there, but there's 0% across there. And then we look at certified FTE by object. Of course, the major part of this is our teaching staff and teachers, but also this is our teaching support, teachers on special assignment, athletic coordinator, learning resources, librarians, any and all positions that are certified to teach are on this page, on page 29. Principals, the superintendent's office. We believe Superintendent Rundle is certified, but supervision, special ed, and student services. But yet one more way to kind of peel the onion, take a look at our budget. Where do our expenditures go to personnel wise?
And I think also what's great about this is not only expenditures, but as our enrollment declines, that our staffing is
Yes.
declining as well.
And then on to page 30, we have revenue support operations. We had those charts way early on where you saw the 3 levels, the local, state, federal, which was red, blue, green in those tables. And here's a little bit deeper dive in regard to the 2022-23 comparison of 23 to 24 and the percent change. And an explanation of, well, it's local revenues at 17 million or 22.6% of the budget. It explains exactly what that means. And then why local taxes, there was an increase due to CPI for local levies. And we budgeted that for full capacity at $12 million. And then local support, non-tax, there was a decrease due to reduction in student fees, donations, and events. We look at state revenue of 51 million or 67.8% of budgeted revenues. Once again, an explanation as to exactly what that is, if you don't know. And then state general purpose, there was an increase to the CPI via the state, an increase in enrollments and additional apportionment over budgeted amount. And then state special purpose, or as we know, special education, an increase due to the CPI increase via the state of Washington. And then finally, federal and other revenue at 7.2 million or 9.6% of budgeted revenues. A lengthy explanation of what that entails because of all the federal grants we received mainly. The federal special purpose, there was an increase due to grant capacity built into the budget. And then revenue other entities increased due to change in practice with CapTech levy salaries as previously mentioned.
With respect to local taxes, this is the EP&O levy. I know when we did the original resolution, we had a cap of $12 million. Have we hit the cap?
We will hit it next year.
And then how many more years of the EP&O levy do we have?
We have till 2026.
Oh, so we still got 2 years.
So 2 things on that. One is the cap that we're gonna hit already. And 2 is, I believe there's going to be a resurgence of effort in the legislature in the next session. I don't know, Director Lurie is a legislature rep, you may be hearing the same, but I'm hearing there's gonna be another resurgence to go to try to increase capacity for districts on there, and so that we get the Seattle deal, if you will.
Yeah.
Resurgence by communities,
Yes.
not by the legislature.
Right, communities.
But.
Yeah.
We'll see, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
It needs to.
Yeah, it needs to. I think that would be a good thing to
Yeah.
advocate for, and if we could. If we go out for a vote at that point in time to follow the new increase, either we have to go out for a vote or the legislature allows school boards to decide. One of the two, yeah, if we go out for a vote, we should start thinking about what that cap should be,
Yes,
in the future as well. Yeah,
is it, does it, since we have positions on the ballot in November, does, what am I trying to say? Sorry. I know we have to pay every time we go on a ballot. Is it per item or is it every time? Meaning, would it make sense to put it on in November because we're already on it?
yes, it's per item, and it also helps when there's more of us,
Mhm.
school districts, cities, et cetera, in there to spread the wealth, if you will.
Okay, so it doesn't make sense to do November. I mean, if we're paying per item,
Right.
I'm just thinking if we're already on it, does it save us any money to go on at the same time?
No.
Okay,
Yeah.
Might be, yeah.
Well, I mean,
probably not a
minuscule.
lot.
Right.
okay,
I think a budget, a voting item is de minimis to use your term, that cost versus the revenue we get.
well, sure, but
Right.
we're also, I mean, hopefully, at least with our community, we'll have a higher turnout because
Yeah.
there's other things on that.
Yeah,
And your,
But if it doesn't make a difference, then.
and your point, sorry, and your point with the EP&O levy, we spoke to an attorney at their Laswell conference. In regard to EP&O, it would have to go out to a vote of the people.
yeah,
That he sees it nearly impossible, the legislature would allow districts to do that. And we would not be able to do a 4-year, we would just be the remainder of the already approved remainder 2-3 years, if you.
I see.
Right,
Okay.
so not really great news.
Well, it's fair. It's nice to understand the restrictions and limitations around it. So thank you for that research. That's helpful.
And we also played through, I asked, Director Sullivan, Director Adams, just to go back in time and play through. So if we could do it again, what would they be recommending or whatnot? And I think you said somewhere around 14 million would have been your
14 to 15 million.
So we'll learn from the past to get ready for the future as well, to think about what we'll do differently in the future.
And this is one of those things where when we do go out again for an EP&O, we historically have worked with Piper Sandler. They are the economists. They are the ones that look at the markets. What does inflation look like? What's it predicted to look like? And we ran our EP&O numbers by them to say, is this a realistic, is 14 million in our case, which is a topical part of the conversation, is it realistic? Or is 15? But we also have to weigh that against if it goes out to a vote and our citizens look at, geez, you're asking for 15 million. Could that get passed, if you will?
Yeah, and we ran that levy pre-pandemic, and pre-inflation, and, you know, we were all set for 2% inflation, not for what.
Right.
Yeah, so, yeah.
We also actually started to anticipate lower enrollment, and then we ended up not being, if you recall, last year, we didn't end up being as low as we thought we would be. And so because the EP&O is driven by enrollment in our case, we actually did better on enrollment, which I hate to say it, but it hurt us in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then on to page 32. The top part of 32 was presented to you at the February 9th meeting, way back when, enrollment, and that's still the case. Myself, Director Adams, Superintendent Rundle are watching this very closely as we move forward here in the next coming months. But we are tracking I would say quite closely to what we estimated thus far.
And we're gonna go over that in more detail after we break.
And then the bottom of the page is historical and projected student enrollment. I thought this is always a nice table to have. It goes back to 2012 to 2013. You can kind of see the ebbs and flow of our enrollment as a district. And then finally, once the budget is approved and ratified by resolution by you all, we will have the F-195. But I always caution the F-195 is a bunch of zeros and ones that very few people understand, but that will be a part of this bound document once it's all said and done. Questions, comments?
Comments?
And if there's things that you would like to see in this document that aren't there, please let me know. I'd like to include that as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you. This is, this looks very transparent. It's a great document that will allow people to scrutinize in many different ways. I appreciate that at a high level, it is balanced and clearly it'll be interesting to see what scrutiny brings out and any idiosyncrasies that people find, but that is the goal. And we've got till June 22nd to make adjustments.
And if there are major adjustments, obviously we'll bring that to your attention. Obviously next Thursday in the June 22nd meeting, we don't anticipate any major changes, but there will be tweaks here and there.
Thank you. I think the one comment, I think in one of the charts, you had federal and other dollars combined, which I think was federal and schools foundation dollars. Is that what it implied?
Yes, correct. Other entities is what our accounting system denotes. But that is something I typically combine, but it is pulled out on page.
On other pages it is pulled out. Yeah, I do wonder if that should be separated because it overinflates federal and
Yes,
devalues actually local contribution. If anything, schools foundation should be considered local contribution. I think that's the way the community sees it.
thank you.
No, I really appreciate the increasingly, as we work towards transparency, is really to communicate this in a way that it is easy for those who are not in the budget world, and they can see this and have a understanding of how our budget really reflects our values and really reflect our strategy where we want to be in balancing all these competing factors. So I see that. I love the ability to kind of see the big picture, and also we broke it down into all these little programs and projects. And it's I know it's a lot of work, but I think that when we do the front work, there will be less backward and have to explain people, and it's necessary, because I think when the community is educated on this, then it will make it easier for us when we go out to the levy and all this, because we're bringing them along this process. So I really appreciate you and your team to doing all this work to make it really clear for us to understand what you're seeing, right? Yeah, this is really good.
Yeah, I just want to thank Director Adams, Assistant Director Garcia Fava, our principals, our office staff. We've been meeting with them constantly for the last 5 months to put this document together. There's a lot of legwork behind the scenes, and they've done a wonderful job.
Maggie Tai, any comments?
Okay, yeah. When do I not have comment? Yeah, like everyone else, I really appreciate this. I think this is the most transparent budget report we've ever had for the community as well as for board directors. And yeah, thanks for everything you've done. And thanks for the kind of like slow but dedicated, like gradual, like harnessing of the budget into a more kind of district friendly, board director friendly annual calendar. I know it's not easy to take an existing system and kind of shoehorn it into a different shape. So your work is appreciated.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're at 9:57 right now. Should we take a 5-minute break? Sure. Okay, and we will take a 5-minute break and return back at about 10:05. we're back from recess at 10:06. And we're continuing with our budget retreat.
So I'm going to provide an enrollment update for you. You saw on the budget there, we are projecting 3,880 FTE. And then that will lead into Director Battersby's report on staffing. Where did we wind up with the certificated RIF? And then what were the other reductions? And then what's our plan for restoration? As we get more students or where the students are coming in differ just a bit. So in elementary, we're anticipating just over 1,500 students, 1,509 to be exact. To date, we're 97.55% there. We're only 37 students short of hitting that target. So last week, we asked Giovanna Koseski, who's our student records officer, if you will, or manager or coordinator, to give us an idea of what does enrollment usually look like from June 1 to August 31, just so we could get a better idea of what we might be able to predict. And in the 21-22 school year, so preparing for that school year, summer 21, we enrolled 94 elementary students between June 1 and August 31. And then last summer, we enrolled 73 elementary students in that same time frame. So we're feeling really good that if we're 37 students short, even if we hit half of what we did last year, we will cover and we should be right on target for our elementary projection. Where we're seeing where we're coming up the shortest, and this is every year, is kindergarten. We're at 76% of total for kindergarten. And the bulk of those numbers I just gave you tend to be kindergarten and first grade. Students who are enrolling in the district either were in private kindergarten or they're new families but haven't quite enrolled their kindergartners yet. But we're at 99% budget in first grade, 97% in second grade, 105% in third grade, 103% in fourth grade, and 100% in fifth grade. So we're tracking really well. Director Sullivan and Director Adams have been, as they said, working tirelessly with the office managers in the schools. And we have a live tracking sheet that provides live updates that we check. It's always on my tabs. I go there 4 times a day. We're feeling great there. On the middle school, we're just a couple students above budget at our middle school. We anticipate that will go up based on talking to their registrar, Marcy Barreca. She's heard from lots of families who we're not here yet, but we're coming. And so we anticipate, and then the high school's already over budget by about 25 students or 25 FTE, I should say. That 3,880, I think is a really great target. I think we're going to be getting there as we roll forward. And with that, as I've been explaining to community members or even our staff, we just can't afford to miss on 2 really critical numbers: staffing and enrollment. When we have a larger fund balance and you can miss by a teacher or 2, let's say in kindergarten, and maybe have those smaller classes, we just can't weather that like we have before. And so we've been a lot more restrictive, knowing that it's easier to add back because once it's out there, you can't take it back. And so we've started a restoration process, and I'm going to turn it over to Aaron to talk about, where did we wind up with our reduction in force and our reductions, and then what are we looking at as far as adding staff back. You're probably potentially going to be hearing or have heard, and we're working with lots of families, especially in elementary, the class size conversation. True to transparency that you wanted in the superintendent, we're wanting across our system, as you saw in the document today. But I've also been asking our principals to share very transparently with their elementary community what do class sizes look like and where might some combination classes happen? And that's creating lots of questions. And so down at Lake Ridge, for instance, Principal Christensen had sent out a message talking about potential grade configurations of having lots of splits in 4th and 5th grade, and then followed it up with a webinar where she talked about lots of options for the school, and then got feedback from families. Principal Wolmuth is going to do the same down at Island Park. I believe his is scheduled for next week, because he's got some higher numbers in 5th grade. He has one at 30 and one at 29. And an example of a conversation he wants to have with the community is he's actually going to have his 5th grade teachers with him. And they made a decision not to do a 4-5 split. And it's because his teachers came to him and said, with a new literacy and already with the new math, we'd rather have 30 than try to do a 4-5. And then they're going to be able to explain that to their community and talk about why they feel comfortable. And I really think that's important to have our principals and teachers together on this. And I think as a parent myself, and I believe our other parents, when they see that their teachers feel confident about it, I think it just builds that trust.
And to add on to that, I know we've had some really successful splits in the last however many years. And as a parent, it might be really helpful to have a parent who experienced that, to talk about their
Yeah.
experience,
Great.
because, you know, it's easy to hear from. I mean, it's great to hear from the teachers,
Right.
if they're confident
parent-
of parents'
That's a great
experiences.
idea. Absolutely. So I think we're gonna see some splits. You know, we'll probably see a 1-2 at one of the schools. I think we're gonna see a 2-3, potentially a 3-4. And so, you know, as we get these weird anomalies of kids and not wanting to bus them all around the island, that kind of creates some of this, but it's all about maximizing our resources and utilizing the best we can. So with that, Erin.
I mean, and
Can I
just
just-
also the numbers of kids that actually end up looping up with their teachers. I mean, usually it's like, I mean, huge numbers, huge percentages want to loop when they can.
Right.
So I just think that's
Yep.
a number too that shows that it's successful.
Absolutely.
Can I just jump in, since you didn't spell it out as in as much detail as the principal did, that the objection that those teachers have to doing a split class is that they would be having to learn a whole additional year of new math and new reading curriculum, as well as adjusting to a split class. So that's the issue with the new curriculum, that instead of just like mastering the one level of, like, you know, the 1 grade worth of new material and kind of new processes and new systems, it would be 2 years. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that. And some teachers are really comfortable with that. I mean, if you're a new teacher to a district, you're learning everything new.
It's all
you
new
know?
anyway.
So,
Yeah.
You know, there's a context here around, you know, when you know, versus there, but some teachers are very comfortable with that. Others feel like, I want to really get solid there. And I think the teacher in any situation, especially in a combination class, really matters. I taught a 5-6 combination class one year, and it was one of the best years that I ever had, being able to mix students. But you know, it is really about the belief of the teacher in themselves, and then being able to instill that in the parents and the confidence with the students, and it emanates from there. So.
All right, so I was asked to provide the board with sort of an update as to where we are, because obviously we previously.
You
brought-
get to provide the board. You weren't-
I get to provide, sorry. You're welcome. To provide an overview, because obviously brought a RIF, which you guys approved earlier this spring, and just sort of where we are now as to our reductions, specifically with certificates, because that is what we brought to you. There you go. So with respect to our certificates, so those are our teachers, for those who are listening. So we brought to you a 7.1 FTE RIF. So everything is an FTE. There were many columns within that. So subcategories, 0.2 science, or a 0.4 elementary PE. So, but combined, it was a 7.1 FTE reduction, and non-adverse actions. So those are reductions that we made that didn't require a RIF. So we had an additional 8.6 FTE.
Andrews, will you minimize Sorry, Maggie, Ty, we're gonna minimize you for a second so we can see the full screen.
Is that me?
Or move her.
There we go.
Is that,
There we go.
it's over,
Yeah,
I don't,
it's there.
I don't think I'm controlling that. Sorry, I'm
It's
moving
okay,
mine
it's
around.
perfect. You're good.
It's like I moved it around, it didn't seem to
No, no.
cause impact. So non-adverse action, so that's reductions we made without risk. So that's not backfilling a retirement or having a person go on leave and not getting a leave replacement. So someone's out for a year, not getting someone to backfill them. So that was an additional 8.6 FTE. Since that time, we've restored a total of 4.7 FTE since we made the RIF decision. Part of that it's really been just as the RIF was driven by students and student needs, so has been the restoration. So at the elementary, we restored 0.4 in PE and music. So if you recall, we did a 0.1 reduction at 3 of the 4 schools in both PE and music for a total of a 0.6 reduction across the board. We added 2 elementary classroom teachers because of increased enrollment, and that drives up the total number of sections in the elementary schools such that it's appropriate to add back the 0.1 at those schools. Specifically, I believe that was Lakebridge and Northwood had an additional section added. So again, it was, fortunately, we got more students. So that is why you see an increase there. At the middle school, we had a reduction in science, and just because of student interest, we went ahead and restored 0.2 science for the year at the middle school level. So that RIF has been restored by 0.2. And then there's a 0.1 elective because there was interest by the students and we had frankly too many kids for one section. So we added a section. So that is at the middle school level.
And sometimes people ask, how can you do a 0.1 because the classes are 0.2s, it has to do with trimesters.
So it's an additional trimester of elective. So that the kids have the opportunity that we're seeking. So similarly at the high school, we had a tremendous interest in our radio program, which especially for incoming freshmen. And so we have to look at where are our kids wanting to be, and if we don't have those offerings, where can they be absorbed? And looking at sort of the CTE options and the fine arts, I think was the driver behind radio. So we added additional radio sections, additional science section, and directed studies in math. And again, that's just based on student enrollment and trying to keep, in some of those cases, our numbers a little bit lower to meet student need. And then finally, we did have an administrator reduction, which was our special learning services coordinator was RIF'd on the RIF resolution. That has been backstored, but not in the same format. So it's been backstored as or backfilled as a special services assistant director. If you'd recall, we previously have had assistant directors in special services, and our special ed population has not declined at the same rate as our overall student population. So the numbers are still there for special services. And it was determined that that was the best place to expend our resources to make sure we're providing all students with the supports that they need. So instead of restoring the learning services coordinator position, we went back to the model where we have a director of special services and then an assistant director, so that we can make sure that we're getting the supports that we need for the students. So it's a total restoration of 4.7 FTE. Are there questions regarding that?
Yeah, this sounds great. Can we expand out ID time just in case as well?
I don't know how to. I'm sorry.
I understand.
I know that, do you have are you going to talk about the number of, contracts that we're not renewing? Like the 1-year contracts?
So that sort of appears in the non-adverse action because the limited contracts, and that's what you're referencing this. So those are people who are on 1-year contracts or certificated staff members who have a position while another staff member is on leave. So that's sort of captured in that 8.6 FTE.
Is it only while someone's on leave, or if they're new to the district? doesn't it take some time to get a?
So the way it works, it's different depending on certificated and classified. So certificated, when they're new to the district, they join their what they call a provisional employee. So they still could be on a continuing contract. They just have lower rights than someone who is on a no longer a provisional employee. Those who are on a limited contract are there because they are backfilling a position or at least an FTE, because sometimes that FTE gets moved around. So and we're obligated to keep them in balance. So we cannot have more limited contracts than we have people on leave.
So
that
then they're
makes sense.
provisional.
So
and
provisional, just if you're a new teacher and you have a continuing contract, you could be provisional because you're provisional for 3 years, which you mean to have lower rights. With respect to classified, similar thing in our district, there's 3 years, but you're on a limited contract, so it's only a 1-year contract. You apply for 3 years and then you have continuing rights.
So the provisional are included in these numbers.
Correct. So the provisional are included in the overall FTE of the district.
And there would have been more non-adverse action. That number 8.6 would have been greater had we not also had people who either extended their leave or new people took a leave.
Okay.
So we were able, so then some of the teachers who we would have not been able to bring back, we've been able to bring back. They're not a restoration. It's just that the number was
significantly higher, right?
Yeah, it was 13 or so.
Oh, I was-
We were gonna
I feel like I was hearing something closer. to
Well, that
Maybe
plus
it was-
the ribs,
So
plus,
it's RIF, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, when we make, when we restore some of this position, I think it's really easy to justify, like, a classroom teacher or science, the teachers, because of an increase in students or needs. And, I know a lot of our parents who use special services, they are always asking for more services or they don't feel there's enough. And so when we it's harder to explain the need for administration. So I think if we do this, we just need to better clarify what are the added value, what are their services, whether on a program level or on a direct service level that wasn't there before, or that we could add more to. Otherwise, we will have questions anytime we restore administration, but we just need to do a better job. The other ones are easy, right? It's like, oh, we have another quarter because of high students. But I think the assistant director for special services, I think parents who use that would benefit from knowing how we value our special services students. And now with this, how can it be different, better, for the next year?
it's an excellent point, and we spent quite a bit of time on this one because we knew that one would, as you were pointing out, raise the eyebrows, if you will, of people. So we actually communicated proactively with our SSALD lead parents there, our administrators, MIEA, and we had a lot of support from all of those groups about, yes, we see where the value is, because our elementary team is looking at, we lost an assistant principal. So now you're gonna add in an assistant director, not an assistant principal. And it's really about showing how this person, the value that they bring, because Hannah works primarily with elementary. So she's in there and able to be at IEP meetings or down with students and staff doing trainings, because she's also a BCBA. So I think we will always keep that in mind, and it's an excellent reminder. Thank you.
Are there other questions? And I would be right, I didn't specifically, I did say directed studies. The high school is adding back also, it was slightly more directed studies in the other categories. But again, that was based on student need and trying to provide student supports to make sure that they're successful and that there's space for all students.
Yeah, it's great news. We were able to restore some of these positions back. Do we expect, if enrollment continues to increase, will we expect more restorations? This is the end of the story here.
And this is just sort of backdated to the extent you're interested. You already saw it in the presentation by Executive Director Sullivan and Director Adams. But the certificated FTE by object code, you see over time, we've reduced from 311.9 FTE in our certificated staff back in 2018 to 277 is our projected for next year. That is inclusive of these ads that we just brought before you. But by way of reference, I think it's helpful to understand that we've had roughly, just even looking at our reductions in student FTE, we've had about 11.2% reduction in student FTE in that time frame, and this is an 11.11 reduction in FTE. So our certificated staffing is really, we've tried to align it to where our students, so it's seen a similar decline. And that just supports that what we're doing is aligned to our enrollment. And if you want to look here, this shows how we made a decision as a district. You see in 2020, 21, and 21, 22, there's a less, we were pretty stable despite decline. And that was a decision during the pandemic. We made a values-based decision that we wanted to direct support for our students during that time, which is so challenging for both staff, families, and most particularly our students. So our decline wasn't steady, we were sort of flat, and then we started to go down, which is why it seems more painful now, because it hasn't been as, we were not always lined up or aligned with our reduction, but that was an intentional choice.
And so it'd be good to have the enrollment bar graph, or sorry, a line graph on top of that too, so you can see both at the same time.
Yeah.
But that's
Yes.
that's great news. And in the previous slide, you had the percentage of administration versus staff. It's pretty low, right? 6% of roughly principals and central administration.
Yeah, it's
7%.
yes, significantly less than in our buildings, which is yeah.
Yeah. So we're running a pretty lean administration and principals. Maybe one wonders too lean sometimes, but yeah. So people should take that away as well. Other questions?
Where is, the professional development? I was gonna say where are instructional coaches on there, but.
Teachers on special assignment, this is based on the object code, this is what we call code.
Okay. Well, and I think that that's a great message too, is the shift was from administration to supporting staff directly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always direct, but
Yeah.
different focus.
Yeah, and it moved from evaluative, which is administration, to support, to your point, yeah, which is a very nice values-based move, yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? I don't think. Sure.
Great.
Okay, great.
So we'll try to provide another similar update in June at the last study session as we head into the summer. If we've had any other exploration, be sure to let you know about that. So the remaining agenda item that I was hoping to cover too would just be as we look towards the study session in June. There's been conversation that we've had around, you know, some of the fundamentals and maybe wanting to take a look at, even if we like the language of the fundamental, perhaps the superintendent interpretation or the monitoring report. We'd like to revisit that and take a look at maybe some different metrics and different ideas. My hope would be we choose maybe one maximum of two, so we can do it well and really go through. Probably wouldn't spend the time doing all the changes, but talk conceptually about what we want to see changed. And then that would allow the learning services team, myself, the business team and HR to the extent that where they play into it. But it would give us kind of the summer to start tinkering with things and then bring you back a proposal maybe in your late August or early September meeting, which then would make the changes in time for us to respond appropriately and adequately as we monitor the fundamentals for the rest of the year. But if there are other items that you also want to cover at the June 22nd meeting, you know, we'll certainly add those along the way. But that was one of the notes that I had that I've been keeping track of some things that you wanted to take a closer look at.
For me, I think there's two areas in the fundamentals that I'm just, you know, I might be missing something, but just going based on the last year of monitoring and really kind of the impacts on kids and we just did the critical thinking that seemed to drop significantly. And whether we want to put special focus on that and also the social emotional, we do so much. I think we could do so much more intentionally that is then communicated. I mean, and kind of along, I think we could do a better job communicating our curriculum to the community. Like we know that there's things happening in classrooms with second step and at the elementary level, you know, and I've mentioned before, like the science of happiness class that's at Yale that now has a high school curriculum, that I just feel like there's things that we could be doing more intentionally that's built in and not just waiting for our kids to say, hey, I want to do this, because we know how often that's going to happen. And just kind of building, I don't know, I mean, making sure that those are the things, I mean, I like the suggestion of looking at them during piece, because we often, at least I always feel like, oh, we just monitored it and then don't necessarily have time to digest it before we're then looking at it as a big picture to see what can we be doing better. But those two are the ones that I feel like, I know other people are gonna have stronger opinions, but I feel like in terms of our monitoring and where we really saw drops from our kids.
I'd like to jump in on the social emotional aspect as well. I think in addition to the things that we do in class, like the actual curriculum around social emotional well-being, there's also the bigger question of kind of like, do kids feel like they have a place in our schools? Like, do they have people? Do they have, and you know, this has come up over and over again over the years, do they have adults that they can trust? Do they have, you know, social network? Do they have, you know, like that we see so many kids come before us who are doing these amazing things with, like, you know, music or sports or radio or, you know, written journalism or whatever. And it's like, I love to see those kids, and those kids are thriving, right? Sometimes we see the same kids over and over again. They're like double, triple, extra thriving. But I worry about the kids that we don't see, like the kids that don't come in because they haven't found their place, you know, and I don't know what the remedy is for that, but I'd love to have a little more discussion around kind of like the big picture of social emotional well-being for our kiddos, especially in middle school and high school.
And the monitoring of the data, you know, I mean, it's clear in at least 1 and 2 where, you know, we have numbers, we have concrete numbers, this many kids are, you know, these many kids are taking AP whatever, and they're doing this. So there's very clear data. With the more social science part, it's, you know, it's not as clear. So once I mean, how can we make sure that we're really addressing the needs? I know it's a little harder, but
I was thinking where the board can be, what is our role and where can we be effective and what is the purpose of our study session? Because a lot of times it's been, and I feel like we look at the data, we know the issues, we know, I mean, we do a lot of programming. But like a lot of places, we just do a lot of programming. And it doesn't necessarily, so there's not that next layer of tying it together. making it across, like from the elementary to the middle school to the high school. And is our role to kind of help shape that kind of larger climate culture kind of system change? Or is it talking about like projects here and there? I feel like we do a lot of things. And it's evident in the reports that's sent to us, but I don't know. I just feel like there's something missing in the implementation, the time following the students. You know, from elementary to middle school to high school, and it's so dependent on what they seek out, the individual versus what the system kind of infuse and do. I think we're kind of there, but I don't know. So for our role, what would be helpful for us to talk about? I guess, you know.
Well, and that's kind of, I mean, you're tying together my point, so thank you, but it's, you know, there's lots of things that we're doing, but it's the pulling it all together, and then that way we can more effectively look at, are these things that we're doing having an impact on student success, achievement, well-being?
I think, kind of what I'm hearing is it's not just what does the fundamental say and how do we monitor it, but it's how do we communicate to families of what's important, and then, but how do we take all of these really are seemingly random acts, not negative, they're having positive impacts, but where's the coherence? Where's the cohesiveness in those, so that we can see that from K to 12, here's how this fundamental plays out, not in isolation, but how does one build to the next? And we really haven't told that portion of the story, is what I'm hearing.
And
We'll do cohort analysis, I think, in that, when we do the monitoring, how do they do in kindergarten, how do they do in fifth grade, how do they do in
And
seventh?
when they come in, our little squirrely feral kittens and kindergarten, and then they graduate, that's from the teachers. And then they graduate, you know, and head off into the world. And, you know, there's such a, but we don't, you know, it's, we see it. How do we measure it to make sure we're doing everything we can?
and I think we've talked about, you've talked, Fred, about belonging, you know, adding that to sort of like DEIB, right? Belonging. And as a district, sort of like the idea that kids should feel like they belong. But again, like where's the story kind of that kids can tell about themselves when they think about their time in our school district? You know, like you ideally would want kids to graduate being like, you know, yes, I moved here in middle school, and then you know, and people really welcomed me. And then when I got to high school, I found my people, like I found my place and my thing, and I get to do my thing and it makes me happy. You know, it's sort of like you want to, as you say, there's all these disparate parts to this, and we're doing so much, and teachers are doing so much, and administrators and, you know, parent volunteers and everybody. And it's just kind of like, I think there's not necessarily yet that kind of coherent storyline for a lot of kids and families. And so it's not so much about doing more, right? It's about trying to find that pathway. And I don't really know what that looks like. So it does feel like it's worth discussing.
Go ahead.
Or another way we can approach this in our conversation, we always, people also approach it from an equity perspective, and what's the demographic of our students that aren't succeeding, not thriving, belonging. And we work on that group to identify the current programs that we have is good for a portion of the students, right? And so for those who don't feel connected, then what aren't we providing? That's another way to approach kind of our study session and identifying those students, and then identifying new programming or new pathways. You know, instead of forcing them into our current and assuming that our current pathway, as long as we connect all these is good for all, but maybe it's not. And so another approach.
Yeah, I agree. I think is thriving academically, kind of a canary in the coal mine of being socially, emotionally happy and healthy, and to look at the people who are not thriving academically and say, do you need social emotional help? I don't think that's enough monitoring yet either. So that's an example of something we could be talking about. So I think our goal would be on the 22nd to talk about language changes if I needed, and monitoring changes if I needed, that get to these goals of looking more expansively and more holistically. So social emotional would be one. The other one I toss out would be fundamental 2 around academic pathways, so there are two sets of things, social emotional pathways and strategies, as well as academic pathways and strategies. I think they juxtapose with each other. Is thriving academically helping you with social emotional? And is social emotional thriving resulting in academic successes for students? I think there's
Right.
mirrors of each other here.
And if something that I hear from our schools or from learning services is, if kind of that framework that you just outlined there with how 2 impacts 3 or 3 impacts 2, it also gets back to a conversation we've been having and that I've been kind of putting out there with that. It's just a simple picture of these rocks that go, and you have on one side, you have academic achievement, and on the others, you have social emotional learning, and that it's not an either or, it's a both and. And if that became really the focus, not that fundamental 1, 4, and 5 wouldn't be important, but if you gave that direction, I think the school could really get behind their school improvement plans, really geared towards those 2 fundamentals. We put a lot of emphasis into that. I think that would provide a little bit more strategy and acute focus for the year, which then can be our theme. We can build on that for our kickoffs and everything else. So from the board level back to Director Din, your point of where does the board have that impact? That would send a really powerful message to our schools, to me, to this team of saying, this is where we're going to put our priority this year, not at the exclusion of the others, but to really raise it up to say, this is what we want to really see a difference in the coming school year.
And just to be super clear that when we talk about kids excelling academically, we mean for that individual child, like excelling for whatever excellence means for them, whatever high achievement means for them personally. It doesn't mean necessarily straight A's or AP classes or whatever. It's like them being able to maximize what they're learning and doing.
I mean, we have a EES question that I'm really jostling with in my mind, and it says that I believe all students can achieve the standard. My colleagues believe all students can achieve the standards, and we have a delta there. And we don't even have all of our staff saying that every kid can. Part of that is because I think of what you're talking about, Director Tucker, which is how do we envision that? I mean, if we're thinking about our most impacted student and saying, oh, there's no way they would get to this algebra, 9th grade algebra standards. Well, that might be right, but there are algebra standards that student can achieve that are just not the same. And so I think some of it, to your point, is what is the fundamental goals for different students, and they're not the same universally, but it doesn't mean they're not high. We still have high expectations, and so I think I would like to press on that conversation this year with our district and really think about what does it mean that all means all, and that if I believe I'm in there, but my colleagues aren't, we got to work on that. We need to unpack that and see where is that delta and why.
Well, and I think as a non-educator, we talk about standards all the time. I don't understand the nuance when you break it down, like there's this algebra standard, and I think, I guess I'm just assuming that many in the community are the same as me, and I'm happy to say I don't understand it because I'm not an educator. But to break it down and really with inclusion and UDL, it's how do we help students achieve those standards, but we really need to understand those. And I'm not talking a deep dive into understanding education theory, but just a lay person's understanding. And so that way, how can we help our students achieve those? But I think we need, at least I need a better understanding of what those standards are, and therefore how can we help all of our students achieve them.
Great. So we'll spend a little time. I will prep the learning services team. We'll do a little part on kind of teaching and learning side of some things. We'll spend some time then on breaking down fundamentals 2 and 3, and then envisioning what might that board expectation be around 2 and 3 heading into 23-24. That sound good spot to go? Great,
Yeah, I think so.
awesome.
I think, yeah, speaking of understanding standards, I think there's kind of two facets of that. There's one, the material of a standard, what's in a standard. I'll take computer programming. I can learn the standard around computer programming. There's another thing to think about is what's the value of having achieved that standard? And whether that's job or doing something else or enabling you to be ready for a vocational course or for job or for college. I think the value of standards might also, might help parents who don't know about a standard understand what the use is for their child to achieve it. My dad was a doctor, didn't understand the value of, some of the math standards or some of the computer standards. But maybe he put that aside and allowed me to pursue those, those standards. So I think the value in some ways might convey something. No regrets.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I think the way that we lay these our fundamentals out make them like they're all equal. And I like the fact that you said that it's really the balance of 2 and 3. When I look at 1, 4, and 5, and I also don't want people to think that those don't matter, but those are like diversity inclusion is really that umbrella that will make the social emotional enhance that, and also the education, right? But when we lay out as 1, 2, and 3, we're just like they're all kind of equal things that we're teaching. And but 1 is like a personalized learning environment, right? It's really that foundation that will make 2 and 3 better, right? And so similar, and yeah, so I think 1, 4, and 5 are slightly different than 2 and 3. But I think when we kind of to say we're gonna focus on this, people are like, wow, fine, it's not important. But like, how do we infuse 5? Because it has to be a part, 5 has to be a part of making 2 and 3 better. You can't separate that, but then they're kind of as umbrellas, or they're kind of larger, like foundational kind of. But yeah, so anyway, that will be more the messaging and the teasing apart, but just laying it as one, fine. It just, sometimes people are just seeing that they're all kind of the same.
Right.
Well,
And-
2 and 3 are so inner.
Yes. Yeah, but then the other, like 1, 4, and 5 is needed in order to fully live out 2 and 3. Right?
And I think our schools would agree that, that the messages that we've been sending them, and these are our principals or teachers, is that, all the fundamentals do have equal weight, and that they're all important. And what we'll be sending the messages, they're all important. But right now, 2 and 3 is really the core of what we need to really work on, and allow these others to be the overlay sieve that we're still sifting things through,
Yes.
but it's really all for 2 and 3.
Mhm.
Okay,
All right, I will put together some frameworks on this and some things, have it ready for the president as we get ready for the 22nd. And in between now and then, we have the 8th to revisit the budget report that you saw today. Lots of recognitions and celebrations of some more accomplishments by our students and staff, and some other finish up work. Then we have graduation. We'll be together the next week for that. Then we'll come back on the 22nd to wrap things up before we take a recess for the summer.
lovely. Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are we ready to adjourn? So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn, please?
I motion we adjourn. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Against? We've got a 4-0 to adjourn. We're doing it a little bit early, so thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Megan.
I didn't say that for Freddie.
I know.
I feel like the staff, especially as a middle school, they're doing a really good job in when you, and I don't know, there have like an influx of new families, but they're really doing a good job in trying to connect the new students to the existing, or current students, and to also community members. right? And I'm just kind of, because I am kind of the recipient, you know, like they reach out to a number of people, then it came to me, then so I assume they're doing this to other new parents as well. And like, oh, here are people in the community from similar cultures and ethnicity, you know, how do they help you transition? So I appreciate that. Yeah, and but the funny thing is like, so it led to like Oliver, like, they're like, oh, you know, and Oliver's like, am I gonna be the ambassador for every Vietnamese? And he's like, I don't speak Vietnamese. You're failing. You're better ambassador. He's like, he's all stressed out, he's like, now I'm here.